I think we're going to take the full 2 hours. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We have attendees from multiple time zones and multiple continents on this Zoom today. Welcome to the Santa Clara University IEEE webinar on OpenRAN and 5G. I'm Alan Weisberger with the IEEE Tech Blog and the Santa Clara University School of Engineering. First, I'd like to thank Santa Clara University School of Engineering for hosting this event, and special thanks to Father Joe Israel, who's managing the Zoom logistics, which are much more tricky than I thought they would be. Now for today's agenda and progression. After my opening remarks, we'll hear the position statements, 5 to 8 minutes each from our 5 panelists. That will be followed by several rounds of Q&A. The first will be moderated by me and then by John Strand, our co-moderator. For all the attendees and also the panelists, please type your questions in the chat as they come to your mind. The questions can be generic for all panelists or specific to one company. I'll try to sort them out, review them during the Q&A session, and combine like questions into one, and hopefully fold them into the questions that I have. Next, John Strand, our co-moderator, will ask important questions from a network operator perspective. John is the founder of Strand Consults, who has Strand Consult in Denmark, has a lot of mobile network operators as clients. So let's begin and introduce the 2 topics for today's webinar. The first is OpenRAN. Through disaggregation of the radio access network into functional blocks or modules and defining open interfaces between those modules, OpenRAN technology promises to allow newer, smaller players to sell into the 4G, 5G network equipment market. That market has been dominated by 4 or 5 big base station vendors for quite some time. And the intent is to give more choices for cellular network operators who would no longer have to rely on those 4 or 5 big vendors. OpenRAN has been endorsed by 5G upstarts like Dish Network and the major cheerleader Rakuten in Japan, but also by 5 big European carriers: Deutsche Telekom, Orange, Telecom Italia, Telefonica, and Vodafone, which want to build an OpenRAN ecosystem in Europe. AT&T has also expressed interest in technology. However, there remains a lot of skepticism, for example, from T-Mobile and Verizon and other large telcos. And this is especially because of the absence of standards and the difficulty brownfield carriers would have to maintain 2 wireless access networks, conventional RAN and OpenRAN. Conventional RAN with the purpose-built wireless network equipment from the big vendors. For private 5G networks, there are many ways to go, many ways to build it. For example, we may have the mobile carriers completely bypassed, where an end user licenses spectrum and on his own or via a system integrator puts together the pieces of a private 5G network. But private 5G will have to compete with both new versions of Wi-Fi and private 4G networks, which are already being deployed. Very interesting to see what type of company will be the winners in the 5G private networks. Among the contenders, legacy carriers like Deutsche Telekom, Verizon, AT&T, NTT, all of which have announced trials or early deployments of private 5G network. The legacy network equipment vendors, Nokia has announced at least 4 private 5G networks. Maybe Jane will be touching on that during her presentation. The cloud computing giants, in particular Amazon, who says there's nothing like it, about their private 5G network, or IT vendors with no cellular network presence like Cisco, HPE, Dell, or Intel. The upstarts who are also pushing OpenRAN, like Mavenir, Parallel Wireless, Rakuten, Symphony, etc., may also transition to private 5G. Systems integrators, they see a big opportunity. Accenture, the ones from India, Wipro, Tata Consultancy, Tech Mahindra, etc. I'm sure our distinguished panel will shine light on each of these new technologies, their company's perspective, with the unique opportunities and challenges faced. First up is Jane Reigard, who will talk about how Nokia is making OpenRAN an integral part of its end-to-end software streams and hardware interfaces. Hopefully, she will also touch on the 5G private networks Nokia is currently delivering. Hello, Jane. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks for having me. And you're absolutely right. I will cover both the private wireless as well as the O-RAN part. I will say to begin with that, of course, opening up interfaces on the telco side, we've done that for a long, long time as an industry. You can say it's more than, I think it's more than 10 years ago, we talked about operability and how to do open interfaces on the upper layers of the software stacks in the telco side. What is new when it comes to OpenRAN and O-RAN is, of course, that we are suddenly saying that we're moving this openness aspect into the radio side. And here I want to be clear on the first part that from a Nokia perspective, when we talk about the edge of the network and how we do open up, there's a difference on whether we are opening up interfaces, so O-RAN and O-RAN compliant, or we are separating hardware from software, because I can do either or both ways, right? I can do Cloud RAN, where I have general compute. I can do that without opening up interfaces. At the same time, I can open up interfaces without having to do Cloud RAN interoperability. So from a Nokia perspective, we take the overall view on that openness will happen. We've done it across the different network parts. And for this one, we also then, when we move into the radio, we have to be very, very clear on what is the interoperability that is needed and how do we manage this. Because when we open up interfaces in terms of the O-RAN parts, we enter a multi-vendor environment that is not only about taking things apart and we can open up for more, but in order to get the performance that our customers actually want, we have to be able to put things together again. So where we talk a lot about disaggregating the radio in terms of OpenRAN, for us, it's equally important to say, how do we make sure that we re-aggregate the radio? How do we make sure that we get the performance? Because the customer requirements have not changed. You know, we can open up and we can talk about this, the different opportunities, but in the end, we need to have a radio that is more than, and no offense to the Wi-Fi industry, right? But we can't just do Wi-Fi replacement. We have to get the performance that we need to have out there. This also means that in the overall scheme of things, that when we talk about OpenRAN, opening up for various parts, the life cycle management that comes within this cycle of putting things together, we have to consider that as part of the ORAN and the management of it, because we have to again be able to live in an operational world where the radio functions when we put it back together. So for us in Nokia, it's not only about opening up the interfaces, but opening up the interfaces driven by the customer's parts, and at the same time being able to put them together and keep the performance. And what do we then need the performance for? And that's, Alan, I'm very happy that you talked about the private wireless networks. I will, however, say that it's not 4 networks, right? In Nokia, we have 420 customers driving private wireless networks of various parts. And that means in total a lot more networks, because quite many of the customers have more than one network. And it's true that we can do this running on, you know, you can even count whether or discuss whether things like old railway systems or P25 networks on public safety would be private networks. But in general, we talk about what is then covered with LTE. So what is covered within this 3GPP world, LTE, and now also with 5G. And we see that the 5G type of networks are booming in terms of saying how quickly have they moved on and how much do we see them. But is there a connection between the private wireless needs and then the OpenRAN? At least from our point of view, there doesn't seem to be a connection, because the private wireless needs often is driven by business decisions. So what do the end users want of these networks. They want to be able to drive the business processes. They want to be able to drive the efficiencies or productivity out of them, and not necessarily care about whether there's one vendor or two vendors or whatever. But it has to be easy to manage, and it has to be easy to operate, and it has to be reliable. And that's often also when we can have a longer debate on that afterwards. But do we see that there is a requirement in the private wireless market that says this has to be open? No, there's often we quite even not seeing whether there is a requirement for what type of technology that is there, but we have to be able to mix and match. So as we move forward, I think that the ORAN part with the front haul gateway or front haul part to start with, but of course also interfaces that we see on the abstraction layer, like the near real-time and non-real-time RIC. We can talk about what is the rest of the ORAN parts, and I'm sure we're going to come into acceleration parts as well. But we can basically have the view of ORAN, but it is not necessarily, again, needed in order to provide the private networks, because the private networks have got different requirements for the use of them. But from an OPCO perspective, very much saying that if the customers, their requirements on the OpenRAN, let's make sure that we can open up the parts that is needed on the radio, but let's make sure we can put them back together again with the right performance in the end. And from a private wireless perspective, definitely a market that is growing as we speak, and we see the initial customer networks already out there, both on, as you said, on 4G, but definitely also on 5G for more than 80 customers now that is running on 5G networks in the private wireless market.
Thank you, Jane. I would like the panelists to pay particular attention to Jane's last point, very important point, that private 5G is mostly driven by the customer's requirements, and that's going to be different. Whereas, so openness really isn't needed from that perspective. And the OpenRAN is more of a generic solution, not customized to any particular end user need. So please keep that in mind when you present and when we have the questions and answers, because you may have a different point of view on how OpenRAN could conceivably transition to private 5G. Okay, next up is John Baker of Mavenir. Mavenir is one of the leading, if not the leading, OpenRAN total solution providers. I think they're more real than Rakuten, in my opinion. He'll first let us know how the industry got to this point, and then follow on from there. John, take it away.
Good afternoon. Yeah, so actually I seem to have a problem sharing my screen.
Your co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Okay.
Click on that
If
share.
you look under more, there's a share screen and share screen option.
Yeah, and my desktop is not allowing it. Okay, look, I'll work with that slides, but
you know what you can do? You can send me the slides, and then we'll post the slides on the either the SCU and or IEEE ComSoc website, and then everybody could have access to it.
All right. Yep, I'll send them afterwards. Yeah. Okay, so to the first point, Mavenir is, as I say, he's not an upstart in the sense, we have 300 operators globally, and we pretty much carry.
I purposely didn't refer to you as an upstart.
Okay. But anyway, so we handle pretty much
total solutions provider.
Understood. And we handle pretty much all of the messaging on a global basis, unbeknown to most. And we've been supplying softwareized or virtualized solutions to our customers for the last 10 plus years. So Mavenir has a lot of experience in terms of virtualization and software in deployment of networks on a global basis. And as we said earlier, that the industry has really gone through the process of an open core and interoperability in the core, and I think markets are on a level playing field for EPC, IMS, etc., and suppliers know how to compete. So really, Mavenir has been at the forefront of OpenRAN and open interfaces from essentially day one in this journey. to really level the playing field in the RAN space and ensure a level playing field for telecom vendor diversity in terms of the radio and the baseband processing of the RAN network. So OpenRAN, yeah, is becoming a reality, pretty much every continent in the world has commercial deployments going on or trials, and significantly with Dish, with Vodafone, Deutsche Telekom, Axiata in Malaysia. So right across the globe, there are solutions being deployed with open and interoperable architectures. And I think it's important to point out that OpenRAN, as originally envisaged, is about open interfaces and interoperability. OpenRAN doesn't dictate how you build the RAN network. You can build it with hardware, you can build it with software, or the latest generation of ideas. And it really is about supplier diversity with interoperability. What's also happened at the same time is the convergence of virtualization in terms of bringing software to take over what the architecture, if you like, that's being put into custom silicon today. So through our partners like Intel, who we partnered with on the FlexRAN solution, very much bringing a software solution to do what is actually been done in custom silicon in the past. So to that extent, we really, open interfaces and virtualization really sort of converge to produce, essentially this fast changing OpenRAN marketplace. Back last year, there was a series of Plugfests that took place in 15 locations around the globe, about 100 companies participating in the interoperability testing of those various network elements. And so, the OpenRAN ecosystem as such is growing, and it's growing fast. There's a lot of product that's coming out there. There's a lot of interoperability testing going on there. Mavenir alone is tested with 10 plus radio manufacturers, and so we know the state of the radio industry, and the same testing is going on with software vendors and other platform vendors on a global basis. So, the train has left the station. OpenRAN is a reality, and these Plugfests and these deployments that are going on a global basis are actually proving that. It's worth taking a step back and really sort of addressing, how did this problem sort of arise? And if you go back to 1987, actually, when the GSM MOU was actually written, within the MOU itself, it talked about a specification of open interfaces that and defined for GSM at that time a list of interfaces that should be open and non-proprietary. Now, the same, if you like, the same regime, if you like, should be in place for future standards. But as technology has moved on, the premise of open interfaces sort of got lost along the way as far as the RAN was concerned. In the core and other aspects of the mobile networks, we've shown that interoperability works. We've shown that you can compete on a level playing field, and the market is evolving with multiple vendors and changing vendors in that space. And we see that is necessary in the RAN space as well going forward. And, to that extent, the ORAN Alliance, which actually started off as XRAN through Stanford, put the first specifications into place to do the front haul, and then it is morphed on from there. But it's an operator-driven community. Specifications are open to all, fully specified, and to the extent that you can see, as I say, you can see what you get from the specification perspective, and they are proven to be interoperable. Comments about this brownfield greenfield situation. Well, in reality, there is no brownfield situation that exists in any network. If you try and find two networks or one network, even with two vendors building out the same frequency band in the same location, it's almost impossible to find because interfaces between, even the existing vendors are still locked down. And I'm talking in some respects specifically about the X2 interface. This whole debate about brownfield, greenfield, well, in reality, every network deployment is an overlay and every network can be treated as a greenfield type scenario. So, that's one part of it. And Mavenir is a firm advocate for opening up all interfaces that are specified, should be opened up on fair and reasonable terms and should not be used to monopolize the marketplace. So in that said, open specification is not just about the ORAN Alliance. Open specifications is about 3GPP, and to that extent, any others that an operator so chooses to bring into the portfolio to bring the system together. But it's important on a global basis that the interoperability is there at all levels of the network to ensure a global marketplace.
Thank you very much. Before you go, I have a few points of clarification, questions for clarifications for you. First, my clarification and my understanding is that the challenge of the brownfield network is in the network management, element management interface. Forever, the network equipment company had their own proprietary element management interface to manage their boxes. And that was always different. And now there are two sets of such interfaces. One would be for OpenRAN and one would be for conventional RAN. Further, a clarification on the specifications. As I understand it, the main organization that is generating the OpenRAN specifications is the ORAN Alliance, but there's also the TIP OpenRAN project group, which is either making their own specifications or involved in interoperability testing. Can you comment on the TIP OpenRAN specification group, project group?
Yeah, let me cover that one first. And Mavenir is a member of TIP and actively participates in TIP. TIP is not writing its own specifications. TIP actually is supporting the ORAN Alliance and 3GPP.
So it's more interoperability testing?
Yes, that's correct. So they are supporting the ORAN Alliance and 3GPP specifications because they are the main specifications. But there's definitely no new specification writing going on. There is product requirement specifications, if you like, that they're supporting the 5 MOU operators and other operators that need product requirements, but that's completely
the 5
different.
MOU operators, the ones from Europe?
That's correct. And that's completely different from, actually writing interface specifications. So again, to be very clear, interface specifications are coming from ORAN Alliance and 3GPP. To your question on the O&M management side of it, yes, the O&M, challenge, if you like, has been historically a problem, from day one. And, it doesn't matter whether it's open interfaces or closed interface equipment, that there's many different views of products that will support, network management, network integration. And, I personally have deployed, different vendor equipment in different parts of the network, where you bring the screens together and the operator manages the equipment. Now, the great thing about the ORAN Alliance is it took this task in hand and through netconf yang models and is bringing together a common standardization process, and obviously that's being taken up into the RIC for the network management side of it. But a network, whether it you build it with OpenRAN components or closed RAN components, is always going to be built up of many different vendors' products, and there are going to be slight nuances that certain operators need and certain operators don't. So but it's not a barrier in terms of this brownfield greenfield stuff. It's that problem is fully solvable, and the real issue is about getting the RAN interfaces open, such as the X2 interface, that's a challenge. So that's the advantage that OpenRAN will bring. Eventually these interfaces will be open and you will be able to mix and match.
Okay, we're going to talk about that a lot in the the Q&A. From my perspective, having followed this since its inception, I think it's the greatest problem that OpenRAN faces is interoperability due to the lack of solid standards. Okay, next up, we would have Caroline Chan of Intel, but she's not available. So Sridhar.
Caroline's on.
Oh, she is? Sridhar said he was going to present. Is Caroline on? Hello?
Unmute.
Yeah, she's on. I'm just going to share the slides.
Okay, so Caroline is on. Terrific. She's going to talk and Sridhar is going to share her slides.
Someone has to unmute her. I think she's trying to talk, but she's muted.
Caroline, can you unmute yourself?
No, I don't think she can.
The moderator needs to unmute her.
Yeah, can you unmute her?
Okay, I am finally, somebody free me up. Thank you so much. So actually, by the way, I actually served on the TIP board for many years. So I completely concur with what John said. TIP does not write our own spec. We use the ORAN spec, 3GPP spec. We're really focusing on interoperability testing, integration, putting together prototype, setting up lab. In addition to the G5 that you mentioned, the Europeans, we just kick off at Mobile World Congress, Barcelona, a GCC 7, the Gulf states 7 countries got together, form an alliance to share the OpenRAN spec, share the lab. The lab's gonna get set up in Abu Dhabi. So I just want to make a quick comment before I jump in. So if I go to the next page, I wanted to, Alan, you asked me to address some of the Intel's in what we're doing in ORAN and 5G private networks. And
Yeah,
so I want to quickly.
FlexRAN seems to be a leading platform in the early deployments of OpenRAN.
Yes, because we invest early. It's been about, I've been with Intel over 10 years and pretty much all my life it's been spending making sure the cloudification of the network happens. So this is a chart that we've been using a lot. But the point I want to make is Intel, when we looked at 5G, we looked at 5G as maybe slightly differently than others. We really look at it as much more of a digital transformation. So the last page I wanted to talk about is around what we see the investment is going in today, and not just by us, but also all the other vendors that investment that's really coming in. ORAN, VRAN is definitely, if you've been to where you're in a Mobile Congress, and that's the talk of the town. Multi-access, how do we integrate Wi-Fi 6, the fixed network as part of the overall 5G play. So it's not just about 5G, it's about multi-access. Private networks, in fact, Jane and I shared the stage, talk about private networks in one of the panels, talk about the town, security and trust, zero trust. That's the major theme. Being cloud native and MEC 2.0. So it's not just mobile edge compute, but it's about multi-access, it's about hyper-converged edge. And I would talk a little bit about that too. And network slicing, and of course, non-terrestrial satellite network. So those are the investment trends that we've seen happening. If the next page, please, Sridhar. So then the other things, when we looked at the 5G network today, in general, we divide that into, besides the device and things side, the on-prem edge, we see a virtualization happening there. We see network edge, because that's the what we call the far edge, like typically RAN will fall under the far edge, or SDN will also be part of that. Core network, that's probably one of the very first to get the virtualization and cloudification. Intel has several businesses span this, the network business as well as the IoT business and our connectivity business. So the one that with the arrow covering are the ones that I'll be focusing on sharing some of our view today. Next page, please. Then, well, you mentioned, Alan, where we see the VRAN, ORAN happening. So we looked at, you mentioned we have a FlexRAN software. We do have a reference software that we license free of charge to people that would adopt our platform. Up to today, we just counted that's about 140 or so license holders worldwide.
And what are you licensing? Are you licensing software?
Software, yeah. We're licensing software.
x86 processor?
Correct. It runs on Intel architecture.
You're not
utilizing-
licensing any hardware design like
We do
ARM does.
have reference design hardware, which we typically provide to our ODM customers that they will modify on top of it.
I got it. Thanks.
So it's no different than the typical go-to-market panel. But if you look at this, the dark blue, this is our best knowledge. The dark blue is the trial and pilot disclosure. And then the light blue are what they have announced commercially. So it's a mixture of green and brownfield. So you could see this as you know, because you mentioned about green and brown, we see both happening. The enterprises ones are the ones that we work with now, whether it's in the US and worldwide, and especially in China and Asia, believe it or not. Japan is one example, Korea is another one. But we see a significant uptake in that using a 5G connectivity in conjunction with Wi-Fi, in conjunction with already have in SDN, that's what we call the multi-access piece, in order to modernize their operation in the enterprise side, factory floors and retail. I have two examples later on. We'll share that exactly what's happening there. Okay.
I have
Next
one.
page.
Can you go back to that slide for a second? The previous slide, clarification. You showed there Verizon Cloud RAN. Can you define for the audience what's Cloud RAN?
So Cloud RAN, I think Jane also alluded to that, is a virtualized. A lot of the significant cloudification happen, but not necessarily yet open interoperability. Like there's not necessarily mix and match. Yeah.
It implies virtualized RAN equipment, but not necessarily open RAN equipment.
Correct. Not necessarily missing a match in radio
Right.
with the
Okay.
baseband,
All right.
like the
Thank
way
you.
that John was describing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay. Next page, please. So this is what we have worked with on the Intel side. We provide the CPU, the Xeon, both the Xeon specialized for network as well as general purpose Xeon that goes in the cloud and enterprise. So from ecosystem partner side, you know, Mavenir is definitely a great partner of ours. We also work with Jane's company, Nokia. Pretty much a lot of the broad ecosystem that runs on Intel. We went going from as far from venue, private network type of providers, small cell, all the way up to the macro business side. From industrial side, we work with all of these. If I call out the ORAN Alliance tip that I serve on the board with 3GPP, but there's also very specific 5G vertical consortiums, such as 5G AA, which are focusing on 5G for automotive. There's one that's not missing list here is a 5G ACIA, which is focusing on 5G for industrial. So you can see this industry-wise, it's not just about the operator side. It's also about how do I take 5G, how do I take virtualized network into different verticals? And that's a very clear distinction 5G has from the previous generation of wireless. And that to us is a broaden of our reach of market. That's what makes 5G exciting, with attracting all the investment, including Intel. Because otherwise, your TAM is pretty much fixed, and you know what the worldwide operator CapEx is year after year. By opening up into different verticals, you essentially enable a much bigger market place for many more players to come in. That's why the whole virtualization concept becomes even more important, because at the end of the day, all of these require a lot of application developers. So next page, please.
Wait, one second. You have IEEE there, which of course I represent. So, well, a long time.
I spent a lot of time with IEEE. In fact, Globecom is a must attend for myself.
IEEE has a future networks initiative where virtualization and 5G play an integral part, just for everyone's information.
Yeah, which Intel is also part of.
Good.
So,
okay, please
next
proceed.
page, please. So then let's go talk about a little bit of private 5G. And we actually talk, when we talk about private 5G, we talk about private is completely owned and operated by an enterprise, but we also spend into the hybrid and public model. We see, public network comes in and offer a network slice to the enterprise. We actually have an example of like that in China that was announced for a car manufacturer in Guangdong province. We see that as a viable, although it's not as mature because the network slicing itself needs to be mature in terms of practice. So today we see a lot more is a CBRS as a good example in the United States. Private, but many times either operator with companies like operators like Verizon, or in some cases we work directly with the cloud service provider. We have announced several deployments and trials and early pilots with AWS, as for example. The cloud seems to play a ever more important role because enterprises are comfortable with the consumption model as a service model. So that's something that for us, this ecosystem needs to work with and figure out how we can coexist and benefit both sides, right? And we don't want to be just providing a pipe as a telco industry. Hybrid is probably the one that we think that will be converged more and more, that combine the both of the public and the private and be much more cost effective. Using network slicing will reduce some of the complexity and, more importantly, the cost. But time will tell.
Caroline, please let me jump in here to call attention to that. That is a really crucial point, and the first time I've ever heard it, that hybrid is going to play a big role. Today, it's almost like a brick wall between private and public, but I hear Caroline saying that a combination of both will have more sustainability. Is that correct, Caroline?
What we have seen from the cloud side, remember that our network really coming from the cloud division, we see hybrid becoming a lot more important and in terms of adoption into the cloud side. So we do see, at least we're definitely watching this
hybrid
trend
public
coming
and private clouds. One more thing I'd like to mention is that it seems to me that the cloud hyperscalers are going to be playing a big role in building and maintaining 5G standalone core networks, which are supposed to be cloud native as per 3GPP. So if you're going to have a real 5G network, public, private, or hybrid, it's going to have a 5G core, which it seems is going more and more cloud native with the big companies like Amazon and Microsoft, and to a lesser extent, Google playing a big role.
I think that, we're seeing the early sign, like the recent acquisition announcement or partnership announcement between AT&T and Microsoft pointing to that direction.
Exactly.
As any technology trend, whether it becomes a big player, we have to look at the technology advancement and also, more important, the business model, right?
Yeah, but Amazon is building the 5G core for Dish.
Yeah.
Okay, please go ahead.
Let's, Alan, maybe just a clarification on that one. They're building the compute for the 5G core because the network functions, and I think this is a clear one we probably need to spend more time on, right? What is the network functions that is providing the 3GPP functionality? And where do you run these network functions?
Okay, let's save that for the Q&A. Yeah. Okay. All right, please proceed.
Okay. So Alan, I based on our conversation, I started breaking down into where we see the most of the early verticals pop up.
Excellent. I love this slide.
So industrial is definitely one now. We initially identified industrial retail. Now the pandemic kind of shifted that a little bit. All of a sudden, education becomes very important, right? The last 2 years have nothing but taught us that we need to take care of our children. So alongside with AWS, we actually launched several remote education type of initiatives, both here in the United States. Early on in China, we started with the local hyperscalers to bring a lot of the education from the city into the villages. So and then the transportation, the smart city initiatives with the government funding, if the Build Back Better initiative actually get approved, you're going to see a lot of ports and transportation hubs, especially with the logistics challenge, gets funded. So initially it was this diagonal, now it becomes all four becomes equally important. So then I have two examples that will wrap up the conversation. So Industrial 4.0, we actually see 5G probably like digital twin probably had the most important application there. I think Jane, you talked about it at your panel, our panel up in Barcelona. I completely concur. 5G, when you're debating between what is Wi-Fi with 5G, the argument has always been they should be together, including the SDM part of it. But we see that really coming in, a lot of the programmable logic controller PLC is rapidly become virtualized rather than a fixed function. We see that happening in more and more of the factories that we're dealing with, including Intel's own factory that's coming up into speed. Zero trust becomes like almost, you cannot even talk about it without mentioning you have to have a zero trust. CT, the IT, the OT, all had to combine together. As when you were talking about actually management of the brownfield, this has become even more important. Single pane of glass, allowing the owners to see everything's happening. What is Wi-Fi, wired, or 5G, and data parsing management, extracting the data real time, contextually in order to refine the operation, inventory management, for example. In a factory, it becomes even more important. If you read the AWS 5 as a service announcement, they focus a lot on the data management side. So my final slide, please. This is a retail case. They call them the quick service retail, QSR. But people always think, oh, retail doesn't need this. But actually, I don't know what is a pandemic of really speed up the how do you try to supply? How do you use real time demographic to track who your shoppers are? What do you look at? What do you not look at? All the orders that you put in, pickup orders. We see a very rapid digitalization of a retail outlet in a way that we never thought about before. We also think about just a point of sales. It actually becomes a whole bunch of automation, activation, follow-up through a shopper's journey, whether it's online or offline. So this become a very interesting place for us. So I just want to show two cases for our panel conversation later on. So okay. I'll hand it back to you, Alan.
Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. And a huge takeaway is that these use cases that you have shown us corroborate Jane's point that 5G is going to be driven by individual user requirements. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Thank you very much, Caroline. Next up is Adil Kidwai, Head of Product Management at EdgeQ. He'll talk about his company's base station on a chip. He'll explain the design advantages of software programmability and how his startup company can gain market traction when there are so many established players, including the ASIC divisions of the big base station companies, providing silicon for wireless network infrastructure. Adil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alan. Can you hear me?
Oh, loud and clear.
Cool. Thank you very much for having me, Alan, here. And I'm so honored to be part of this distinguished panel.
And we're happy to have you as well.
Thank you. And I'm Adil Kidwai. I'm Vice President and Head of Products at EdgeQ. I'm not sure many of you had heard about us before, so let me introduce you to the company first. We are the newest kid in the block. We were born 4 years ago. Executive team from many different companies, primarily from Qualcomm, Intel, and also Broadcom came together, and we formed this company in the mid of 2018. Our background is through and through modem. I myself have worked at Intel for a long time in the Intel modem division and the cellular and the wireless division, I should say. Together as a team, we have worked on all the marquee products from many different companies. we have grown to around 200 plus employees now. We have 3 centers. The headquarters is in Santa Clara, where I am based, and my CEO Vinay is based. We have a design center in San Diego, and we have a design center in Bangalore, where my colleague Hari is based. We have total to date raised a little bit north of $75 million in equity funding. And as a company, we have launched, as a team, we have launched a lot of SoCs in the market, generated a lot of revenues. If you are using any Apple iPhone or any Android phone, chances are that one of us had to do something with that product. So that is, in short, who we are. Before I go further, I want to make one more point. I think we are the only company in last few decades who is building modern silicon for base station infrastructures. Okay, so we are focusing on wireless infrastructure, not the client side of the. I think that is the talk here as well.
Yeah, I think we all know that.
Cool. Thank you very much. So, introduction about the product, what we offer to the market, right? I think many colleagues before me talked about how 5G is different for different people, right? There are different use cases for 5G. What we offer is a DU layer 1 acceleration card as a PCI acceleration card for OpenRAN macro market. And we also offer a 5G small cell all-in-one solution, which is also ORAN compliant. How we do this is the following. We offer a chip that is programmable. The 5G functions runs on RISC-V processor, where we have written specific macrokernels for all 5G functions. On top of that, we provide a 5G physical layer, which is deployable. Keep in mind, this is very important. This is not a reference layer, this is a deployable layer. One important distinction here is that we make this physical layer programmable. Meaning, if an operator wants to put their own secret sauce in this physical layer, for example, I run across operators who say, you know, I have been doing research on massive MIMO for a long time. I want to use my massive MIMO algorithm. Or I want to use my own channel estimation algorithm. We give the operators the ability to do that. So it is a field deployable layer, but at the same time, it is programmable as well. We are NFIP compliant after layer 1, so we can work with other layer 2, layer 3 providers like Redis or I think I have a colleague here from Mavenir, Altiostar. We are Switzerland when it comes to L2, L3. We are NFIP compliant along with all the massive MIMO extensions and all those discussions that are going on in OpenRAN working groups. We are part of OpenRAN. We are part of OpenRAN working group. Sorry, we are part of TIP as well. So we are pretty well plugged in on how to make this solution work with any layer 2, layer 3 in the market. And we do that at a fraction of power and cost as compared to the existing ORAN solution. I'll tell you in a moment how we do that. I put this slide to share some of how the progression of OpenRAN in this RAN market came, but after listening to everybody for the last 30 minutes, seems like preaching to the choir. OpenRAN is going from traditional proprietary hardware, proprietary interface, all the way to a COTS-based hardware with open interface where you can mix and match a lot of components, software and hardware from different vendors, such that it removes kind of the vendor lock-in and there are different options available. However, I would like to focus on one part of OpenRAN. So OpenRAN started with removing vendor lock-in, that we all understand, but OpenRAN also promised to lower the cost and lower the power, right? If it was not for lower cost and lower power, probably OpenRAN wouldn't take off, because that was the main promise, right? People say, okay, what do I get when I get out of vendor lock-in? You should get some benefit out of that to your dollars and to your cost. So there are 2 points of this focus of this discussion, right? One is the OpenRAN DU and OpenRAN, and the second is 5G, private 5G. So let me first start about the OpenRAN, and I will focus on the DU implementation, the distributed unit. It is said statistically, it is said that roughly 50% of a base station cost over time goes into power consumption. And roughly 50% of the power goes into layer 1 processing for a base station, because layer 1 processing is a lot of number crunching, right? A lot of mathematics. This is a typical chain of a receive or transmitted processing. These 5 boxes here, 5 or 6 blocks, are basically called layer 1 processing, also known as phi processing. We take all these functions and accelerate them in the chip that we have. So all the way from beamforming to front haul acceleration, all the way to layer 1 scheduling, equalization, tone extraction, everything from non-massive MIMO to massive MIMO. We accelerate it in the chip, provide this as a layer 1 acceleration PCI card, which can go into a server like this. Okay, so that is the first market that we as a company tackle, and in doing so, we save a lot of power and a lot of cost because layer 1 is accelerated in a dedicated chip. Now let me quickly move on to private 5G. I think many of the colleagues before me talked about their view about private 5G. When we look at private 5G as a chip and a physical layer company, we think about requirements that will make private 5G successful. The first and foremost requirement of private 5G is lower power. I meet a lot of customers every day where they say, you know, I want to power this box, this private 5G small cell or femto cell or whatever cell small they have with Ethernet, which means power consumption is very, very critical for private 5G to become a reality. The second and most important part of private 5G is the availability of free band, right? Free spectrum. C-band is available across the globe, different frequencies, 3.5 to 4.2 to 4.5 gigahertz. That is another requirement for private 5G because everybody wants to use those free spectrum. One other important aspect of private 5G, which is not yet realized, is the realization of NRU, the NR in unlicensed. This is the 6.3 to 6.5 gigahertz band.
NR means new radio, right? 3GPP,
correct.
New radio.
Correct. NR is new radio, U is unlicensed. So this is the 6.5 gigahertz band where there is 200 megahertz spectrum available. So a solution that is catering private 5G market must be compatible with that because NRU is actually going to come as in release 17. The next requirement of private 5G is lower cost for BOM and footprint. So what it requires is for you to pack all these functions into a small form factor, which means integration of PHY, physical layer, networking processing function, as well as a CPU into the same silicon or a very, very compact form factor. The last one is the most important in my mind. You know, if you talk to the factory operators and the PG&Es of the world and the Disney worlds of the world and theme parks or campuses of the world, you will find everybody has different interpretation of 5G. For somebody, latency is most important. For the other person, capacity is important. For the third person, use case, throughput is important. So the 5G solution, particularly in private 5G, has to be customizable, meaning you don't want to have a separate chip for separate function. You want to be able to software program all these different functions depending upon the use case. We at EdgeQ have architected our solution such that we cater all these four key requirements of private 5G. Okay. Now, private 5G solution can also be ORAN compliant, right? So again, this is the full chain of a modem, of a RAN. This is the 7.2 split, which a lot of us know about. What we offer is to have all these functions run on the same chip and go all the way to option 2 or even option 0. In some cases, I am working with few customers where actually the CU, PDCP and RC function also are running on the same chip, which go into the small cell, which means it's very compact. We offer a very compact, low power and low cost solution, which can go all the way from layer 1 to the NPU to the CPU functionality. Okay. And in doing so, we also support different ORAN splits if the customer chooses to use that. So I'll end my presentation with this slide. This is our real silicon. We have it almost for 9 months in the lab, alive and kicking as we expected. And we as a startup are contributing to ORAN and private 5G by these two products. This is the ORAN PCIe layer 1 acceleration card for macro use cases. And this is a private 5G enabled small cell product, small cell and femtocell product, which provides the solution of private 5G at very low cost and very low power. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adil. I'm very impressed with EdgeQ. They're one of maybe a handful of network infrastructure hardware/software startups that have been funded in the last 10 years. The last one I know of that was successful was Jayshree Ulal's company. She's one of my former students. Okay, now John Strand will provide his assessment of private 5G and OpenRAN from the mobile operator point of view, and we're looking forward to your comments, John. Take it away.
Thank you very much. I have to find my PowerPoint is here, share. So here we come. Just to introduce myself, very short, probably not a lot of you knows me, but basically I've been running Strand Consult for 25 years.
Can you do one slide at a time rather than all of them at once?
I take one slide at a time, yes. Can you see them?
Yeah, but just click on one so everyone can see it and then move to the next one and so forth.
Yes, it's working. So basically we are generating all our revenue from mobile operators or carriers across the world. We have like 170 operators on our client list. And we basically started originally with looking at the technological development, business models, what's happening there. And then 10, 12 years ago, we built up a team of people working with regulation, looking what is the impact of regulation on the industry. Our job is not to say the things people like to hear. We are very often the devil's advocate. Our main clients is top management, board members, strategic people who basically wants to have a critical view of things. And that's basically what our job is to do. Of course, everything wants to be connected in the future. And I just came back from Mobile World Congress where I participated the last, I think, 22 or 23 or 24 years or something like that, back to when it started in Cannes. And basically, I heard again this year about all the opportunities in the future, but let's be honest, operators have not been able to gain any share of the revenue, increased revenue, which have been generated on top of their networks for the last 25 years or 22 years. It all started with 3G, and the operators had a dream of doubling their output because of 3G. The output declined. 4G, it became the smartphones and the app stores who generated that revenue.
John,
and basically until now, we can see that
John,
5G.
John, time out for a second. Logistical concern here. Can you switch to presentation mode so we can have one slide after another rather than all the slides?
Oh, you don't have it like that?
No,
Is
we
it
don't.
like that on my screen?
That's what I told you about 5 minutes ago.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Presentation mode. Oh, sorry.
Who knows how to do that?
Oh, if you could press Control and F5 together.
Control F5.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, 2 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. Yes.
No, oh, you're not still on the right hand corner, top corner. There is a presenter view. You can click on that. You will go
on the top corner.
Mm-hmm.
You're sharing.
Presenter view, presentation. Or otherwise, you can click lower bottom. You see kind of a wine glass there.
Yeah, there's wine. No, that's not a wine glass. Is that one here? No.
The fourth one.
Number 1, 2, 3. This is this one.
Fourth
Yeah.
one. Lower bottom. Yeah.
Yes.
Share the presentation window.
That's presentation.
Is that like this? Is it correct now?
Not yet.
2 seconds. What's happening here? It should be this one. When I do, isn't like now I do the share screen and I have only one slide on my computer.
Yeah, but we see all of them here.
You see all of them. Oh my God. 2 seconds. Animation view. Excuse me. Oh, this is not the one. Sorry.
Yeah. So now it's
Okay, there we have it.
program,
Now
yeah.
we have it.
Now you have it?
Yeah.
Good.
Now go to the next slide.
Okay, thank you. So basically, when we come back from Mobile World Congress, we
Go
basically
to
heard
the next
again about
slide.
how
Go to the next slide. Everything will
Yes.
be connected in the future.
yes,
If that
so
works.
that's the one you have now, yeah?
No, we have, we have just the title slide. Go down
Okay.
to the next one.
You have this one? Which
No,
one do you
I
have
think-
now?
I think you are sharing. I think you have a multiple split screen problem, John. I think you are doing the right thing on the other screen, but we see only your main slide.
Okay.
Do you have two screens?
No, I have only one screen.
Oh, that's weird.
There, you got it now.
Okay, that's good. That's the most important.
Okay, good.
So
What you
basically,
have to do is scroll down and then click.
is this okay? You have it you have one slide now.
Everything will be connected in the future. We have now.
Yes, good. So basically what's interesting is that we talk about all these things, but until now, the operator has not been able to generate any revenue. And we basically see all these things, but the question is who's going to get the revenue, who's going to get the order, and who's going to deliver the services. It's important to understand that if we look at the industry today, we basically see that the only revenue which the operators generated for their shareholders for the last several years is spinning off towers. And the revenue, which you look at what the operators across Europe have created revenue, which didn't exist in the past just by spinning off towers, and you add it up to the global level, it's basically the revenue they get for their towers is equal to what they spent on RAN in 68 years. So it's very interesting. Right now, the operators' focus is basically on generating revenue to their shareholders by spinning off towers. That's where the key focus is right now. When we look at OpenRAN, and when I look at it and when I talk to operators, I feel it's fine. We have this roadmap. I have nothing against openness. I know there's 100 open APIs in 3GPP, but I have nothing against these things. But I just feel it's too little, too late. We have today almost 200 5G 3GPP networks which gone live worldwide. And when we hear the OpenRAN community, they mainly talk about trials, the same way as it was orders. So if we look at it and we take Dell'Oro's most optimistic, and we can also take other companies who do numbers and say, how much OpenRAN will there be sold in the future? And we compare to the installed base, then the OpenRAN will represent in 2025, about 1% of the sites, and in 2030, around 3% of the sites. So the question is, how interesting is it to have a technology which is only deployed on 3% of the sites? Would that create an ecosystem with services, innovation?
This will be a good discussion point for the panel.
Yeah.
Obviously, their companies are betting their life on there be more than 3%.
That's fine. But the reality is nowadays, 10,000 sites are deployed every month. Every month. We talk about 5G is the fastest technology which ever been deployed in this industry. It's going faster than 4G, which went faster than 3G. We basically see countries where we have operators who have 80, 90% 5G coverage. So what's interesting here is that this is happening today. We also see there's a lot of countries across the world where there is a lot of 2G and 3G. If we go to a country, and I know John Baker would probably say, oh, we have a 2G solution, but basically it's a 2G solution which is glued on top of an OpenRAN solution. OpenRAN Alliance is doing the specifications for 4G and 5G. And the question is, should I as an operator deploy two networks, one which have 2G and 3G and one which have 4G, 5G, have more equipment in the towers, spend more equipment on the more energy on the equipment, and having even a more complicated network instead of having one base station supporting 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G. So basically what's interesting is that if we look at the legacy there is in this industry and the fact that today, according to Vodafone, this year there will be sold 14 million 2G phones alone in South Africa. In 2025, there will be more than 1 billion 2G users across the world. So it's quite interesting to see that there is actually a huge legacy. So the question is, yes, there is market where we go for full 4G, 5G, like in the US and so on, but there is still tons of market across the world where the things look significant difference. The interesting thing is saying that when we talk about these private networks and we move into this space, I basically think that the OpenRAN players will find it very difficult to sell their solutions to the classic operators. To be honest, those guys are rolling 5G out now big time. They're deploying it every day. And basically, when for them is to say, why should we do it? Yes, I hear small cells, I hear indoor, I hear rural areas and so on. But honestly, these guys are focusing on doing these things. And the network responsible guys, the CTOs of these operators, KPIs is basically who can deliver the best network to my customers today, how's my customer satisfaction, how is the churn, etc. And basically I believe that a lot of the OpenRAN players, they will move down and try to go into the, what can we say, greenfield operators like Dish and Rakuten and try to move into that space. And then we think they will try to move into the private network. But in the private network, I don't believe that companies will say, we would like to have 5G or we would like to have OpenRAN. They want connectivity. And it's very important to understand that this connectivity on the corporate market is not a new connectivity. All these companies have connectivity today with using Wi-Fi, using cables, etc. So the question is, when these companies and a factory want to migrate from existing digital infrastructure to new digital infrastructure, they want to have a cheap price. I don't believe they're willing to pay more. So you have to be able to compete with Wi-Fi providers in a market which will be very crowded from different players. When we can discuss about licensed spectrum and unlicensed spectrum, using 5G versus using Wi-Fi, etc., etc. But basically what's important is if the OpenRAN providers cannot deliver better, cheaper solution and more value for money than classic RAN or Wi-Fi, I don't believe they have a chance. So then again is, who will be the providers here of this solution? The question is, do we believe that mobile operators have a chance of building private networks for private 5G networks for companies?
Okay, John, let's wrap up. You'll have a chance when you're moderator to control.
So, and I don't believe operators have a chance in that market too. I think
the question I have for you, just real quick.
On the other side is, what I want to say is, where I feel there's happening something and where I see the innovation, that is in the former CBS alliance, the OnGo alliance, if you could say that. In that space, I see a lot of interesting companies doing a lot of interesting network solutions, which provides a lot of interesting service on top of these things. That's basically where I see the innovation. But in the end of the day, I feel that there's too many myths of OpenRAN which don't pass an acid test. We have made a free report, which you can request from our website, which we call Debunking the 25 Myths of OpenRAN. More than 3,000 people have requested from our website. And I would love to discuss these things because I feel when I talk to operators and to the technical guys, I basically get a totally different view than when I normally participate in events like this.
Okay, one thing that isn't clear, are you saying that mobile operators are not going to be the big winners of private 5G, that probably the big winners will be someone else?
Yes, fully correct.
Who bypass the carrier completely?
Totally. I don't believe, listen, a lot of carriers have outsourced their IT to different companies like Tata and that kind of companies, IBM and so on.
Tata and Wipro and
all those guys. So why should I, as a company, which outsource my vital infrastructure to a company which have outsourced its vital infrastructure.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, John. I'm going to start the Q&A with one that my most burning question, and then I'm going to take from the audience because I see we have quite a few questions in the chat. What I hear a lot and read a lot is things like, will my radio work with your baseband unit? Well, we asked them to test, but they don't have anything to test with us for interoperability. There are lots of concerns about genuine multi-vendor interoperability using the ORAN Alliance specs, and they haven't been forwarded or even liaised to ITUR, which is the official standards body for IMT. That is, in this case, 4G and 5G, IMT, International Mobile Telecom. As such, is OpenRAN really trading one type of vendor lock-in for another, as LightReading claims? And when will real mix and match vendor interoperability happen? Panelists, go ahead and jump in. How about Mavenir first?
Yeah, I think, you know, as I say, and there's a lot of FUD in the marketplace. You know, first of all, that OpenRAN is not a revolution, it's an evolution. And so, you know, it's going to take its time, just like any other vendor coming into the marketplace. You know, it takes time to establish that. You know, we've seen that in the core space, and to the extent that, you know, people can compete in the core, and market distribution is across multiple vendors that have different names. So that's one side of it. And then on the interoperability side of it, you know, we've gone through extensive interoperability with multiple radio manufacturers. Dish is making it very clear about, you know, minimum of 2 vendors for every component in the network, improving interoperability. You know, I think the great thing is that the OpenRAN specifications are shown to be interoperable, and to that extent, you know, are free for all to have their implementations of it. Yes, clearly on day one, when vendors start, you know, you see different interpretations of the spec, but the plug fests and the interoperability testing is showing that the process works. And, you know, again, going back to the core, we've seen that whole process work itself out over time in the core. So there should be absolutely no reason why it doesn't work in the RAN. And so, you know, as I say, there's a lot of FUD in the marketplace. People make claims about them being open where they're not open. You know, the people that have OpenRAN product are clearly out there in the marketplace with it, and it is being commercially deployed in volume. So, you know, I think it's just a case of looking in the right places and talking to the right people, and you know, then they get a true perception of what's going on in the marketplace.
John, in addition to Mavenir software, do you also have or are planning to have a baseband unit or some type of OpenRAN module? I believe you are working with a foreign supplier on the radios, but are you making yourself any hardware?
Mavenir has announced a complete portfolio of hardware, you know, of radios that we're working. You know, we have invested in design capability to design reference designs, and we showed that at Mobile World Congress. We also work with multiple other radio manufacturers just purely because of the frequency bands that are available. And, you know, the market consolidated over the last 10 years, and Mavenir is, you know, is really saying, putting its money where its mouth is, and really developing product for the global marketplace. And you'll see more of that to come. You'll see the reference designs available, and those radios are available for anybody that wishes to purchase them. So we're not, this is not a Mavenir initiative to you know, from Mavenir to become another Nokia and Ericsson in terms of complete hardware development end to end. So, you know, but certainly the whole radio industry had to be re-stimulated to, you know, really bring new players and smaller players to a level where they could compete in the marketplace.
Thank you very much, John. Jane, do you have any comment? As you have indicated that Nokia is planning to incorporate OpenRAN interfaces in your forthcoming network gear.
We have, so let me be clear on this one. From our side, OpenRAN interfaces is not something we add. We also, in the case of buying a Nokia RF and a Nokia baseband, we're still using OpenRAN, right? So for us, there's no difference. It's not like I'm trying to say that the ORAN interfaces are different from that perspective. So for us, the interoperability is really down to saying what kind of profiles are we using in the different interfaces? What is the different configurations? And of course, going back to saying if it's an ORAN specified interface, it still requires that we align them completely with each other, right? So when we do interoperability testing on the different parts, and I would say that here the front hall interface is probably the ones that is most mature at all in this part, right? Then it's not enough that we say this is ORAN compliant, because every single configuration that needs to be used has to be then tested. And this is basically, you could say, the biggest worry when we talk about this fragmentation of different profiles, and we still at the same time want performance, because we have to be realistic that in order to get performance, we also need to do lifecycle management. So which means that every single time we change a parameter, every single time we change anything, we have to make sure that we retest again. And this part of it, I think, is something that we need to be clear on also in the bigger scheme of what are the interfaces that is available out there, and how do we use them in terms of ORAN. For us, it's important that we talk about the performance that is needed and that our customers require, and that we do it within the scope of saying what is the setup and what is the profiles that the customers are actually looking for in this case of CSPs. As said before, I think the private wireless part is slightly different, and not really a specification requirement on certain things has to be ORAN, but much more on the reliability of the networks. And then I think I have a different comment afterwards on some of this of the private network side on whether the cost drives everything or not. But I think we'll take that later.
Save that comment for the private networks. Caroline, how about providing the TIP OpenRAN project group's perspective on interoperability, since that's what they really chartered to do, test interoperability?
Yeah, we have said, so like as you described, this is what TIP's supposed to do. We are putting that together. We don't write the specs. So we have set up multiple labs around the world. G5 is a good example. How we're driving the key European operators together. We're going to do this similarly with the Middle East operators. There's a platform like John mentioned. We also have community labs to allow startups to come in at very low cost and running the interoperability testing. One thing I think, John, with all due respect, you mentioned about the industry. The telco industry is extremely complex. It's been around. I was in Nortel for many years, so it takes time to evolve a new standard like OpenRAN. It takes real effort and money and investment that all of us are doing to put in there. Software becomes even more important. It's not just producing a hardware. You have to drive an ecosystem around it. The software ecosystem, Intel's been an ecosystem building for many years, and we understand the complexity of it. It will take time, and that's why initiatives like TIP, it becomes really important to achieve interoperability. We are committed. At the TIP just announced Orange joining the board of directors. We are driving most of the operators together to drive an interoperability, achievable interoperability, which that complies with the ORAN spec.
That's very good to hear. Okay, let's move on now. I want to ask an audience question. This is from Stefan, who's an analyst that I respect very much from Del Oro. And he says, OpenRAN is accelerating unevenly across the various RAN segments. Ericsson is working on a new work item to improve the UL, which I think is uplink performance for massive MIMO, multiple input, multiple output. How important is this to improve the massive MIMO OpenRAN business case? Who wants to jump in? Whoever panelist wants to jump in, go for that.
I can say it very simple from an operator's perspective. OpenRAN, massive MIMO is essential. We can see that operators, which a few years ago said that there was something they would deploy like on 10-15% of their sites. We see that now they're talking about is maybe 60, 70, 80% of their sites. Depends on country, numbers of sites, demographics, and lots of other things. So we basically see that the MIMO, massive MIMO numbers is exploding when we talk to operators what their expectations is. And that's because basically where you can say in the old world, we was told that you need one mast to cover a certain geographic area with 900 megahertz. And if you cover the same geographic area with 1800 megahertz, you need two sites. And then the math would say, if you're using 3400, 3500, you need four sites. But the reality is now you can cover the same geographic area with the C-band as you use, when you should use 1800 megahertz if you use the right technology. And we see different operator strategies right now. And I think that 5G is probably the first time where the difference between having a good CTO and having a bad CTO makes a huge difference. And have the right strategy, not having the right strategy, have the right spectrum, not having the right spectrum. So I think it's quite interesting what's happening then. And the operators we talk to, for them, MIMO and massive MIMO is essential, basically.
Thank you, John. I'm going to combine my own question with that of a reader. It was news to me that 2G and 3G are still thriving in the emerging market world, especially since I think of Reliance Jio in India, who started with 4G and is moving on to 5G. I'd like to ask the panelists two-part question. One, do they really believe that 2G and 3G is important for the global OpenRAN market? And two, if it is, then specifically Caroline might tell us, what is TIP doing to test 2G and 3G OpenRAN configurations? Or are they testing it, or no one is testing that and it's being totally neglected? Who wants to jump in? Someone other than John who brought this to our attention.
I think from the first part, sorry, Alan, but I think that the first part is that we still see 2G, 3G very much key for creating the connectivity in a lot of places around the world, right? We are definitely not there that it doesn't exist.
This is really interesting because in the US, carriers are shutting down their 2G and 3G network.
I know, and Europe as well, but there's a lot of people living outside Europe and the US.
Yeah, sure.
So for that one, I would say that it's about the early connectivity and all being connected more than what are you connected with. So definitely a hot topic in that sense, and you can say, like for the rest of US and Europe, right? We probably will see 2G alive longer than we will see 3G for the parts of it. And coming back to one of the questions on the energy efficiency, we can take that one as well. But is it so that in the 2G networks that there's a look for extra vendors or ability or anything else? Well, for most of the 2G networks that is being deployed, and 3G for that matter as well today, it really is about getting the stable connectivity, and it's about using the technology that's out there and not looking at how to create a multi-vendor environment, because the places that this needs to be, coming back to one of, I know what John's favorite topic of ARPU, right? Is there any money to be earned, and what is the connectivity you're creating those places? So in the end, there needs to be a business case for doing these the parts, and for the 2G, 3G network today, it is the very, very early connectivity for these people.
Do any of the panelists think there will be any OpenRAN 2G, 3G? And again, if so, there's no specs on that coming from the ORAN Alliance, and how can TIP test anything if there's no specs? Anyone?
Yeah, let me answer that. You know, Mavenir has a 2G product based on the OpenRAN or the ORAN interfaces. Now, as you say, the specification didn't get developed in the ORAN Alliance. You know, we're happy to give that specification to anybody that wants it, to put it on a 7.2 type architecture. But, you know, essentially we're showing that, you know, with additional software components on the same compute platforms and actually the same radio, you can have 2G, 4G, 5G running side by side. So, you know, again, it's operators that need it. They can have it. 3G is another case. We will develop 3G if there's a business case for it. But we're seeing the majority of operators turn down their 3G networks on a global basis. So, we definitely believe it's 2G, 4G, 5G is the way forward for the future.
Interesting. Not 3G though. Okay.
Not 3G.
Maybe Alan, maybe just one clear, right? It's not so that before ORAN that no multi-vendor environments and networks existed, right? Because they do exist. There's different, as I think you started out with saying that there's vendors.
Yeah, but this is a whole new ball game because you're disaggregating the base station into modules. So that's completely different than having several purpose-built wireless network equipment in the same access network. This is a new ball game.
Well, it depends on if we start with the front haul. I don't think that necessarily that there is a big difference, right? We opened up. You can say you only open up if people want to play with you, but the Nokia upside was opened up many years ago, and unfortunately, too few people want to play along on the openness. But I think we just need to be clear on saying that multi-vendor also exists in environments, even though it's not ORAN specified.
Okay. But let's be clear on this. The reason that the ORAN Alliance started through HRAN was all about getting an open front haul interface and something that was not proprietary and was allowed on a global basis. And that's how this whole thing started 5 years ago. So and as I say, the whole convergence of virtualization, which brought in the FlexRAN, was a secondary effect. But as I said right up front, we have the convergence of open interfaces and virtualization, which are really, aiding this whole OpenRAN debate.
Okay, excellent point, John. Let me go to a audience member question. A couple of audience members, actually. This is in line with, is OpenRAN really trading one type of vendor lock-in for another? Eric asked, is Rakuten really OpenRAN with Aliastar as RAN software vendor? And then someone else says that, someone says Rakuten now owns Aliastar, Rabin.io, NOU, and has its own proprietary DU plus Juniper switch. That is starting to look very much like an integrated solution, which means it's not OpenRAN. What do you guys and gals feel about Rakuten, which is the #1 global cheerleader for OpenRAN? Are they really open, or are they really just a closed integrated solution with their own hardware and software?
Let me say it very simple. They have this symphony, and they have a fantastic symphony orchestra, but the problem is they can't sell tickets.
The name of the company, Rakuten Symphony.
Yes. So basically, as I say, they have a giant symphony orchestra, but they can't sell tickets. So just look at their business in Japan. They have 5 million customers.
That's a great clip.
Limited growth. The main customers they got is because they offer 12 months free access to their network. And despite that, they have not been able to gain market share in Japan. Okay. So reality is that despite Japan is a quite expensive country, it has been very difficult for them to attract customers. So they sing and dance a lot, but people don't go to their concerts. They cannot sell tickets to their concerts. That's one thing. The second thing is, I think it's important for operators. We must remember we have had a consolidation of the industry. And I was down at Mobile World Congress and I heard so many times about there's only 4 vendors in this industry. There was a guy who said that to me. I said, what is the other 1,996 companies who are exhibiting here actually doing at Mobile World Congress? There's quite many companies. Until 2 years ago, Ericsson didn't produce antennas. They bought Catherine a couple of years ago, but they've been using antennas from different vendors. There's a number of antennas vendors. So I think it's important to say this vendor diversity, which people talk a lot about, and there's only 4 vendors. That's not a reality. Just go to Mobile World Congress and see how many companies there is. So that's one thing. Second thing is, when we look at Rakuten, yes, they say a lot, but basically the solution they have in Japan is not built on the OpenRAN Alliance specification. It's a proprietary solution. So I think it's also important to say they are basically not there yet. John's solution is following the specifications, but basically Rakuten is not following the specifications. And I think that's very important.
Anyone else on thoughts on Rakuten Symphony?
So Rakuten has been working with Intel for a long time. So they started this prior to OpenRAN spec was available. So you do what you can at the time, and you fully virtualize and cloudification, and then moving towards OpenRAN. We do see them create a industry momentum, not just in Japan, and they're now rolling out in Germany in 101. In fact, Mavenir is part of the portfolio in the 101 property. The principle of their, based on what, I mean, Tara is not here, so it's unfair for me to represent. Based on what I'm seeing from there is that their principle is building on cloudification, virtualization. The Robin IO, it's a testimonial with a determination to build an entire cloud-like scenario. Ultimately, I do believe, it's Caroline's personal opinion, that the 5G network beyond 5G, to be fully successful, we do need to be very much acting, behaving like the cloud that is here today. If we ever wanted to be part of the digital transformation, be part of the private network enterprise, assets enterprise, if Intel was going to build a foundry based on that, it has to be very much cloud-like. At the end of the day, we consume so much cloud in our daily lives, not just enterprise, but consumers. If we don't tread in that way, as industry, we'll be selling connectivity. We'll become a pipe, and that's not any of us want to see. Especially people who are coming out with engineering degree, like Alan,
I have to agree with you, and just want to follow on. I'm not sure if everyone on this Zoom is aware, but Rakuten Symphony is not only a 4G, 5G, OpenRAN / cloud network core virtualization network operator, but they are also a vendor. They are attempting to sell their hardware and software, sell/license it. And Tarek Amin, their CEO, recently claimed they already have sold it to 17 network operators. Do the panelists think that Rakuten Symphony can succeed as both a network operator and also a network supplier? Isn't that a conflict of interest? Who wants to jump in on that?
I think as Caroline said, we can't speak for, Rakuten's strategy. At the end of the day, I think the one thing I would say is the great thing about OpenRAN and open interfaces, it's allowing innovation and different business models to be generated in the industry, and the best man will win. And, we wish Rakuten the best of luck, and all of our other competitors. And I think, this industry is going to be built on cooperation going forward, where, vendors will cooperate and compete. And, and that's great for the consumer. And that's really what needs to come out of this, is that we've seen 10 years worth of lack of innovation and monopolization of the industry. And OpenRAN and open interfaces is clearly going to change that.
Okay. One quick follow-up from an audience member who says, how open is Dish Network, their Greenfield OpenRAN 5G, when the CU and core is deployed on AWS and shifting that to Azure or Google Cloud does not happen with the snap of your fingers? Doesn't that mean that Dish is married to AWS to eternity with little possibility to choose after it has made its bed with AWS?
No, I think Caroline somebody addressed that earlier. I think Caroline addressed it, the AWS part of it, if you like, is the hardware cloudification platform. It's not the application and the interfaces necessarily that are running on it. And, and I can honestly put my hand on my heart and say, I know that the interfaces are open, and I know the interfaces are interoperable. That's part of Dish's regime, if you like, of bringing vendors into their network, that you have to demonstrate that interoperability. And it doesn't matter whether it's, AWS or Azure or even Mavenir Cloud. It's you have the ability to choose.
Okay.
I think people confusing the VNF, CNF versus the hosting. Jing actually addressed that at the very beginning. VNF, CNF running on Azure Cloud, running on a Google Cloud, it's not the same as being married to that. I mean, most enterprise today runs on multiple cloud. So I think the question was a little misguided. But Jane, actually, you addressed it upfront. VNF and CNF being hosted is not the same as the clouds running the network.
Okay.
Exactly. I was going to say that if we look at it, the software pieces from the radio, and now let's talk baseband, that can we become cloud agnostic? And of course, if you look at what ORAN is thinking, then it should be possible. But we also have to be honest today that within this part, and that comes down to how do we do the layer 1 interfaces? What is the performance we want to have? And when we talk about what the different splits are in the setup, we also need to acknowledge that 3GPP does not say anything about how the features are being deployed on each of the levels, right? So even though we in reality could wish for, or maybe we should wish for having cloud agnosticity, if that's a word, the point is here that it will be a while before we're there, because we still need to give the performance. So there is a kind of part. When I make an airframe open edge server, even though it's OCP specific with Caroline, of course, when I make the software on top, I know exactly what I have and how I can deploy my layer 1 on it. At the same time, I need to have a cloud understanding of what the cache layer is going to give me in order to run this software to the right performance. So is it open? No. Is it more open that if all of it is the same? Yeah, for sure. But I don't think open necessarily means that you can switch as you like from one day to the other, to be honest.
Thank you, Jane. Stay there because I have an audience member question directed at your company. The audience member asks, and I'm going to edit a little bit, Nokia could be the best system integrator. That's what's missing in ORAN deployments. Why doesn't Nokia start integration of ORAN and connect the missing link?
So let's be honest. If there's an ORAN compliant Nokia to Nokia, I do the integration already. I actually do it in the labs, right? And I'll do it on customer side as well. But then coming back to the whole part, at least from our point of view, what is it the customers want us to do? In that sense, because and I'm sure John Strand will tell me several times there has to be money in it, otherwise nobody's moving after it. So I think in this sense that the integration piece, this reaggregation of OpenRAN is a key part of how to get what is needed out on the other side. But of course, there has to be the right business case for everybody in order to do that.
Okay, one last OpenRAN question from an audience member. Let's have someone else address this one. OpenRAN is often advertised as cutting costs, but so far the cost savings I've seen has only been vRAN, Cloud RAN related, and nothing in cost savings mandated for the open interfaces. What are the components that cut costs when it comes to ORAN, specifically keeping in mind that integration and testing costs is present? Integration and testing cost is present, although not necessarily baked into the product cost. Anyone want to jump in for that? Trying to answer that.
I can answer that one. You know,
OpenRAN.
Yeah, it's been demonstrated, and Rakuten, ourselves, others, and there's plenty published at the FCC now on the 40% capex saving and 37% opex saving on OpenRAN. The integration is all baked into those numbers as well. And I see John banging his head, but that's fact. And
that's not facts.
You can always treat to ignore the facts, but at the end of the day, the market will demonstrate which way they go, and that's the way it's at. So you can always present a different view, and you're quite welcome to have your view. So.
No, I'm just looking at. Let's go back to the FCC document. The reality is that FCC did a study, basically, which says there was no cost savings. Then your company went crazy.
I'm sorry.
Is that correct? And you went to FCC and said this is incorrect, and then they say this is so. I think people should read the original document and the document you're referring to, and then judge it instead of. I say something and you say something. I think that's a much better way to do it. But let's go back to the cost saving.
That's a very true statement, John. And I wish, that would be true for some of the stuff you publish as well. So I'll leave it at that. And, you know,
No,
there
but
should be
listen,
a balance,
I think
balanced
go to
presentation of
FCC's
both
website.
views.
Go to FCC's website and read both documents.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. Now we're going to move on to 5G private networks. There are going to be a lot of 5G private network players, legacy carriers, new entrants, cloud companies, IT infrastructure companies like Cisco, Intel, and HPE, who are new to wireless infrastructure, and Mavenir, who could possibly extend OpenRAN to private 5G. In addition, we haven't talked about this at all, but the real 5G network is one that has a 5G standalone core, very few of which have been deployed. I think the Oro has counted something like 20 or 21 globally, as 95% 5G networks are non-standalone. Will the 5G private network winners have a 5G standalone core, and who will they be? Go ahead, jump in.
Me, Alan.
They'll be
Nokia will be the winner.
Nokia is one of the leaders right now.
Yeah, but
I've
just to
published,
go back
Casey,
to
you
your
know
core
it,
question.
I published numerous articles about Nokia's private 5G on the IEEE tech blog.
Yeah, no, but I think going back to your core, because it's a good question, right? And Caroline had the hybrid part. The beauty of having a 5G standalone core is that you can serve it if you manage to squeeze it down well enough, right? That you can do it on site. But at the same time, you have the option of actually doing the right slices out of the core to support various parts. And when we get to 5G, and I think for me, this is one of the biggest differences, the mix and match in network architecture between what is, and now some of you've heard me say this before, I don't like to talk about private networks, I like to talk about dedicated networks, because private, at least in some part, has an idea about who owns them, whereas dedicated, you talk about what is the use case you want to fulfill with it. And if you want to have a use case and you start with an on-premise type of thinking, whether it's manufacturing or it's logistics, but you still want to have the mobility, well then by having a 5G standalone network, you have a better option of mixing and matching out in the end-to-end network architecture in 5G. So these type of parts, we definitely will benefit from having, not relying on a 5G non-standalone. Then of course there is also, if you start from on-premise type of thinking as an enterprise, why do you want to deploy a 4G network if all you're doing with it is basically waiting until you get a 5G standalone? I will say from an industrial point of view, and Caroline, that's also something we discussed earlier, right? That the ecosystem, because 5G standalone networks for industrial play requires that there is the right, not only the chipset, but the chipset sits in the right modem, that sits in the right robot or whatever we want to put it in. And unfortunately, that takes time as well, right? This I would say downstreaming of making sure that we have the right stable chipsets available in the right modems, in the right places, in the right segment is something that needs to come. So work in progress, but for sure 5G standalone will give us opportunities in the architecture that is different than what we see with a non-standalone.
Thank you, Jay. Any other points of view?
Yeah, I think the winner in the private 5G will be the PG&Es and the Disney Worlds of the world, right? Because 80% of the private 5G spectrum is owned by non-carriers, right? People want to have their own private 5G network in their factories, in their premises, on-prem.
You're in the camp of bypassing the carrier, license the system and build your own private 5G.
Sure. Yes, exactly. And that is where we are seeing a lot of traction with private 5G, because you have a core. There are a lot of open cores available. You can work with one of these RAN vendors for the cores, but eventually the private 5G spectrum gives you the ability to launch and manage your own private 5G network, right? The key hurdle to that we are seeing in the market is actually the cost of 5G, right? The cost of 5G cannot be 5 times of cost of 4G because it's a factor 5 or it's lower latency. People are asking that, can the cost of 5G can be capped within 2x of 4G cost, right? Or 2.5x to be max of the 4G cost.
There's another there's another equally important issue besides cost. It's power consumption.
Correct. Exactly.
The millimeter wave.
Yeah.
Can private 5G do anything to reduce power consumption? Any kind of tricks can be played?
It depends upon the architecture, right, Alan? I think eventually
One would think your chip would help because it's only one piece of silicon as opposed to numerous interconnected pieces of silicon on a printed circuit board.
Correct. That is certainly the point. But one more important thing is that eventually people do not have the capacity or the desire to have, thick wires going from one side of the factory to the other side of the factory. One power wire and one data wire, and the third is management wire. This is just non-tenable solution, right? People want to power this device over Ethernet, just one wire going and it's carrying power and data, everything. So that is the other key point that we are seeing in the industry, which will enable 5G if properly implemented. Private 5G I'm talking about.
Okay, one questioner is asking you privately. Can you just chat back to him?
You're talking to me?
Yeah,
Alan?
Yes, he says, let's see, does EdgeQ have major US operators? That's P Sundbar. Just chat back to him.
I see. Okay, sure. Yeah, I see that question now. I think there's another question.
Whichever. Okay, let's see. One more thing I have on private 5G, and then I turn over to John. Del Oro doesn't think that private 5G will have much market share amongst private wireless. They think that Wi-Fi will overwhelmingly dominate, probably about 98%, and maybe 2% with 4G, private 4G, and then even just a sliver for 5G. What's going to invalidate that market forecast? That's like by 2023, comes from Del Oro. And I put a chart on one of my IEEE tech blogs on that. What could possibly change that and create a much larger slice of the pie for private 5G?
I think this has been use case driven, and private 5G, typically this decision makers are not necessarily, definitely not the operator. They make decision based on what's needed, what's to meet the business needs. Digital twin could be one, that will require 5G. Like today, we do see a lot of LTE, we see a lot of Wi-Fi, and coexisting with the fixed network. That's sufficient to meet the requirements. For example, logistics and so on, even education. But as we move forward, if we really talk about metaverse, the way that we talk about, what really transforming digital twin, AR, VR, XR, I think the use case will ultimately drive the business for 5G or even beyond. If you look at what people talk about what 6G looks like, it is about creating this reality, imitating, the whole entire metaverse really comes in play. One of the things that you talk about cost and power, actually, when we're talking to the enterprise, most of the time it's about solving the business problem. This is the problem I need to solve. And at the end, can you solve the problem that meet my requirements, reduce my insurance premium and whatnot in a cost-effective way? It's a more holistic question rather than just saying, here's a 2x of 4G or whatever. Like one of the things I got to applaud what Nokia has done with the NDAC. Really, you said you're solving the problem, right? If you cannot solve this, let me bring it to your whole holistic solution to solve your problem. That's why we see that what Nokia has done in the private network space has really been opening up the market. And now you have the AWS coming in, the Microsoft coming in. There is a game changer happening. The cloud principle started driving what private network connectivity should enable. I would never say that connectivity is the answer. Connectivity is the enabler to solve a business problem. If you look at it that way, I think we collectively have a much better market space to go after.
I think one person explained to me in the most beautiful way about this Wi-Fi and 5G question, and then I will answer the second question later. for the Wi-Fi and 5G, I was talking to a factory floor manager actually, and she was deploying actually private 5G. And she said that the machines will always require 5G because of low latency, and the humans will always require Wi-Fi because they will have their tablets and phones. So we see a world where Wi-Fi and 5G will coexist. And to the other point, right? I think to the factory floor managers and operators that we talk to, right? It's always comes down to, right? Yes, 5G is good and it goes low latency and it looks this, but what's the brass tacks, right? Why do I need to move from 4G? The solution is all good, but eventually, what do I need to pay for this thing, right? And I see Caroline, your view. I mean, you are running 5G on generic processors, so it will never be cost effective. So you can talk about holistic solutions, but eventually it comes down to brass tacks. How am I paying and what am I paying for the solution, right?
Thank you very much. Let me turn to, oh, Jane.
Can I just say one thing? Because I think, first of all, for me, there's two things we seem to at least model up in some of these discussions. First of all, when we talk about the private wireless networks, what are they used for? And from an IT perspective, I would say, yes, that can be Wi-Fi, probably. But when it comes to operational technology, actually, we know that the reliability, more than low latency, more than anything else, is what is required from the parts. And there, we do know that we, in general, have at least the long tail part of the packaging, right? There's a problem. So that's the first part. How do we differentiate between, are we providing connectivity for IT or for OT in this case? And then the other one I want to say, and I want to remind people that when we talk about private 5G, it's not only in the CBRS space, right? You mentioned millimeter wave earlier, but from a global point of view, it's not all countries that has spectrum available for the various parts. There is debates for nearly all mid-band spectrum, but it is not so that it is just given that there is spectrum available for the 5G networks that we can discuss on. So I just want to be clear as well, because it drives a lot of the discussions on what is the deployments and who is engaged in those deployments and what is the business case for it. Because if you can't be allowed to use the 5G network and you have to stick with something else, well, then it's given that there is a split, right? But it's also coming back to John, your comment on the operators, what role do they play, right? And there's a very much a regional difference around the world.
Yeah, one of the large, in fact, Jane, you're absolutely right. One of the largest marketplace we see enterprise network is in China, and there is no private spectrum available. So the operators and the hyperscalers over there do work together and providing this type of dedicated network. I use your word. I like that. It's a public spectrum, but they're dedicated to serve a particular enterprise model, and that actually is one of the largest market out there.
Thank you very much all for your perspective and insights. John, in the minutes remaining, can you ask the panelists your questions from the mobile operator perspective, either directed in a particular panelist or for the entire crew, entire team?
The first question I have is, we talk about openness in networks and vendor diversity. How much vendor diversity do we actually have in this industry? If I look at, we have 2 operating systems on the phones, we have 2 app stores, we have basically in the free worlds 3 cloud providers, and basically I could keep on saying those things. I think there's more vendor diversity in the RAN antenna side than there is in a lot of other parts of the value chain. Shouldn't we look at vendor diversity across the whole value chain? That's the first question. The second question is, this openness, which kind of services do the operators' customers need to get access to the RAN part? Wouldn't it be the openness, isn't the service layer in the future world, wouldn't that be in the cloud? Wouldn't it be cloud-based services? And couldn't we say that, why do we have OpenRAN Alliance when we have 3GPP? Shouldn't we just fold OpenRAN Alliance into 3GPP? Because OpenRAN Alliance is very dependent of 3GPP. And basically, if we look at it, there's much more transparency in 3GPP than there's in OpenRAN Alliance. That was many questions in one. But should we start with?
Yeah, have the panelists jump in.
I think on the OpenRAN Alliance, right, John, one example that comes to my mind is for example, OpenRAN disaggregation, multiple boxes working together in a seamless way, right? I think someone said, I think Jane, it was that the front hall is more properly defined than the other side of the DU, like that is a FAPI. So one example is right now, there is no standardized massive MIMO extension for FAPI, right? Non-massive MIMO for FAPI works well. Massive MIMO is everybody has their different interpretation. ORAN working group is working as we talk to standardize this along with TIP, right? With various inputs from various vendors. So I would think that a dedicated effort focusing on ORAN is required for sure in the short term to standardize what is not standardized yet, because a lot of OpenRAN concept have been taken from small cell forum and that is not cutting it, right? For example, massive MIMO. So I would say ORAN working group, ORAN Alliance has to be there until ORAN not only starts walking, but starts running, right? A dedicated alliance to make sure all interoperability is figured out.
I'm going to keep this short because of time, but you know, at the end of the day, it takes a village to build the world. We need all these standards bodies to come together. You know, it's been proven that 3GPP doesn't provide open interfaces as technologies evolve, hence the need for the ORAN Alliance. They're both as transparent as each other, and that's another debate which I won't get into here today. But you know, we need a village, we need open interfaces, we need a global marketplace, and everybody should be able to contribute.
Does ITUR have any role in this? It's their officially.
Absolutely. Those who want to participate should be able to participate.
Well, how about the ORAN Alliance creating a liaison with ITUR Working Party 5D, which is responsible for IMT specifications and frequencies?
If that's what's necessary, but you know, that needs to be taken up with the ORAN Alliance.
Okay, other panelists want to respond to John's questions?
I think the ORAN Alliance and 3GPP questions being addressed. Vendor diversity, in ideal world, there probably should be more than 2 OS, but there is an economy of scale question come in, right? That's the reason. That's why you're seeing the 2 OSs out there, 2 main OSs out there. But well, I'll go back to the same principle, John, that it's really about building ecosystem. Like if we truly look at the potential of 5G going into the enterprises, it's about us being adaptable. It's about us being able to solve the business problem, attracting as many application developers on our 5G ecosystem as possible. And I don't mean just writing RAN and core. I mean writing industrial applications, precision agriculture applications, in order for this to, the App Store concept needs to be thriving on the 5G private network as well.
Caroline, I think it's with deep respect for you and your company, but I think it's interesting you talk about vendor diversity. If I look at Intel's market share on computer side, server side, I'm sorry to say there's no vendor diversity at all. It's very close to monopoly. Yeah. But that's another.
There's plenty of competitors out there. Everybody, there's always competitors.
Okay, then
out
look
there.
at your market share, but that's okay. I just want to address it. If we look at the services, one question that I've raised many times saying, so people say we want to build an open ecosystem on top of the operators network. Which kind of services needs access to RAN? And who's going to develop those services? Who's going to market and sell them? And who's going to use it? What's in it if I'm a mobile operator? What's in it for my customers? Is it the car factory who needs these things? Or is it the consumer? Or is the corporate company with 25 salespeople, 100 salespeople, 1,000 salespeople? Who need these things, Caroline or John or Adil?
I think at the end of the day, the operators need the toolkit, and which will benefit the consumer. You know, I sort of stand back and say, look, you know, we've had so little innovation in this industry over the last 10 years. You know, we've seen companies like Cohere and others come out and demonstrate spectral efficiency improvements. We've demonstrated spectral efficiency improvements, which drop straight to the bottom line of the carrier. So, you know, at the end of the day, I think the great thing that OpenRAN has done, and the great thing about OpenRAN having this debate here, is that it's encouraging debate, it's encouraging innovation, it's encouraging vendor diversity, it's encouraging investment. You know, the industry could not carry on with a 3GPP, you know, 2-vendor monopoly in certain markets. And so, you know, our lives and the engineers' lives will continue to be fruitful going forward.
Any last comments before we wrap up?
So I was just gonna say that we need to, from this service-aware RAN or radio-aware services, we have been as an industry extremely focused on consumer markets for 30 years, right? And I think, again, coming back to the private networks discussion, where there will be a difference is then it's not about the consumer. We don't need it as such. You can say, how much can we actually consume with one of these? I know my daughter will probably consume more than what she has, but again, what is it, where is it will make a difference in terms of digitalization, in terms of maybe we need to talk about energy efficiency, not only for what we're using as an industry, but what is the impact we do with these networks? And then it might not be on the consumer side. And I think we need to be much more looking at where is it makes a difference for the enterprises, for the operational technology, for how we can actually digitalize. And as my CEO is normally saying, you can't go green without being digital, right? So I think we need to step away from only focusing on the consumer in these discussions, because the digitalization and the use of the networks going forward is going to be more, and is already more, given that what we see happening on the network side, on the private network side.
Thank you
I
so
agree
much,
with you.
Jane.
Mhm.
I'd like to encourage those who are still on the Zoom call to type in their appreciation for the panelists and the spirited discussions and debate that we had. I thought it was very enlightening and insightful. And with that, I would like to thank the 5 panelists and our co-moderator. And again, special thanks to Father Joe Israel for managing this Zoom and making it work. I kindly request all the panelists that have slide, except Nokia, to send me their slides, and I will send them to Benham, the IEEE ComSoc SCB chair and SCU professor, who will upload it to the various websites, those 2 websites, so that all of those on the call will have it. And I'll have ask Benham to send out an email once those slides have been uploaded. So let's see, do we have anything in the chat? I'm hoping we get some. Oh, there's a nice 3 thumbs up. So I hope everyone appreciated the call. How about you, panelists? Did you enjoy it?
I think it was great. I think
Yeah,
there was more critical
the
questions here than
panelists.
they have been on
Get
all
the
the
panelists
OpenRAN
to
events
talk.
I participated on the last 2 years.
Okay, how about whoever wants to, all panelists say their closing remarks, closing comments.
I appreciate the opportunity. I think, you know, healthy debate is a good one, and, you know, and get a balanced view.
Jane?
I can only second that one, right? If we need to open up, we also need to talk.
Terrific. And Caroline?
Thank you for having me. It's a good conversation.
Well, you did very well. I'm glad you joined.
Thanks.
Adil?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great discussion. ORAN and private 5G brings a lot of opportunities. Honestly, a company like EdgeQ wouldn't exist if it was not for ORAN and private 5G. So great discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for joining, and audience members and panelists. Until next time, all the best. Thank you, Father Joe. Bye for now.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day, evening.
Welcome. Thank you so much.